real quick, is that sound like it's on?
You gotta get closer.
Yeah. Real quick, we got a guy here with us, Alec. He's back there with the camera. You'll see him walking around every so often. He's taking some film for us so we can post some stuff up for you guys as far as like sports analytics. But also, he's a recent graduate. He started working for Trevor before he was out of college, I guess, right? MBA that he got last April, June, something like that?
May, yeah, one of those months earlier in the year.
All right.
But yeah, it's kind of a theme we'll mention a couple different times. But I like investing in young people with good ideas, and have a couple analysts working for me right now that are still in college. So we'll get to that in a little bit. But yeah, I'm here to, well, first off, thanks for coming out. I appreciate it. And thanks for having me. This is fun for me. I like talking baseball, I like talking analytics, and especially with people that enjoy the same thing. So looking forward to this. I'm going to run through some stuff pretty quickly. We have a lot that we could talk about. We're trying to keep it to about half an hour. So if you have any questions, I'll try to answer all of them at the end. Please refrain from asking them during the presentation. And if there's anything that we don't cover in enough depth and you want more depth on it or whatever, just ask at the end and we can go on that. But yeah, data analytics and MLB, where nerds finally beat the jocks, which is kind of cool. So I'll let my dad introduce himself, a little bit about himself, and then get going.
So I'm a alum of mines. Chem CPR is what they called it back there, Chemical Petroleum Refining, from back in the 80s. Went out to work for Shell Oil Company. I didn't like the big corporate structure, so I got back into private business for myself, worked in manufacturing for 25 years. And as Trevor was becoming a baseball player, I wasn't a baseball player growing up or anything like that, so I kind of self-taught myself pitching as he was getting more involved in it. So I could stay a few years ahead of him and help him with his pitching. So that's where I come to the pitching side of it. But of course, from the data side of it or something, you know, that's engineering. So I got my basis from here on campus.
Yep, and I'm Trevor, college dropout. I was an engineering major before I left, mechanical engineering. MLB All-Star, lifelong tinkerer. I enjoy knowing how things work and trying to figure stuff out. Part-time entrepreneur. I run a couple businesses on the side. Actually, Alec is here with my media company, Momentum. So I do that, and I'm an enthusiastic disruptor of baseball, industry, etc. I kind of see inefficiencies and try to fix them. So.
And the one thing about both of us is we don't take ourselves too serious. We take the work we do, the research we do, a little bit serious, but we don't take ourselves too serious. So, you know, if there's some stuff that you look at and you go, it's just we're not too hung up on ourselves.
Yeah, I'm going to make fun of him at a couple different times throughout the presentation. So, anyway, my beginning, I'm a son of an engineer. When I was 1.5, 2? You
probably 2.
2. I got what's called a fat bat, what we refer to as a fat bat. It's a wiffle ball bat. It's about this long. And I'd go and hit wiffle balls with it, and that was my favorite toy. So that kind of presented a problem. I'll let you.
I don't have any baseball playing experience myself. So when he started playing baseball, my whole thing was, okay, I'm responsible for him getting better, hopefully, if he wants to play baseball, that he has an opportunity. The first goal was make the high school team, right? So that was the first goal, was to play in high school. And part of it was teaching him some stuff when he was young about the engineering process and how you go about setting a plan, working the plan, and if it doesn't work quite the way you want it to, you make some adjustments and iterate. And you just keep iterating till you get the solution to the problem you want, right? So his thing was that if he actually worked at his private lessons that he got, he could keep getting private lessons. But if it ever got to the point where private lessons were practice and he didn't practice in between, so that private lessons were new, then that was the end of that. So that's the background he comes from.
So basically my whole life I've grown up in kind of an engineer's mindset. Early on in my life, I'd go out after school and practice and run around with my dad. There's a field right across from our elementary school, and I'd go over there after school and do different stuff. We used to have short ground balls where I kind of locked my feet in place and just worked on glove skills, and then long ground balls where I was ranging around and catching and throwing on the run, and then fly balls where I was kind of doing some long tosses, really early forms of it. But it was all kind of designed around, we want to get some improvement in my fielding skills and also get my throwing in, and we can kind of combine these two. And it was an early way of kind of optimizing some of that process.
Later on, the glove skills were more a function of he'd stand with his back against a chain link fence of the backstop, and I would take either a tennis racket with a tennis ball and hit it at him, or a racket ball with a racket and hit it at him. And obviously, it was probably from here to the back of the room. So those things come off that racket fast. So glove work was, there was no backing up. So
yeah, I had to wear safety goggles when doing that. I wore plenty of them in the face. But we got into throwing weighted balls when I was about 8 years old. I had a pitching instructor who was from the Dominican Republic who said they used to throw coconuts and waterlogged baseballs and stuff, and said it was a good idea. So we started doing it. So we'd soak baseballs in a tub of water, and then go out and throw them to each other and get sprayed in the face with water. And after about 3 days, it was all full of algae and disgusting. So
they were slimy.
Yeah. So we had to solve that problem. Did you bring some of the baseballs? All right. So this was one of our first engineering projects. We actually took a drill bit and drilled some holes in a softball, and then pounded fishing weights in there, and then filled the holes with some caulk and went out and threw them. There's a couple different iterations that we have here. Softball with some nails pounded in the seams and stuff like that. But
we did it with hard balls since he played hardball, but we start here with softballs. The one thing about this one is you'll see it's a wobble as it rotates, right? Because it was hard to get the weights centered, right? So that was the first engineering problem. First of all, how to make it heavier, right? That's the first thing, right? Then it was like, okay, now it's heavier, but it doesn't fly too well. So the nails in the seams, that has a better spin to it, but it wasn't quite as heavy. Anyway, we don't want to spend a lot of time. We'll pass them around. On the softballs, if you look at the little holes where the threads go through to sew them up, you'll see the little nails around them, right? Just send them around the room while we're talking, and you guys can look at them or whatever.
You want to start one on that side?
I guess so. Here.
That
Well, go ahead and pass it on. We'll start
while we're doing that, I had a 9th grade AP physics class with a professor called Martin Kirby. He's a British guy. He actually had a picture up on his wall behind his desk of him with 2 packs of cigarettes in his mouth all at once, just this huge line of cigarettes. And he used to be a smoker, so he decided that he was going to quit, and he lit 2 packs of cigarettes and smoked them at the same time, threw up, and then never wanted a cigarette again. He's just kind of disgusted by it. So that was kind of the tone of the class. He was pretty funny. We did a bunch of Newtonian physics problems, and that's really when I got into trying to apply science and engineering to baseball. Up until that point, I hadn't really kind of like formalized the idea that you could combine athletics and academics. Even though I was kind of raised in that process, I hadn't really put it together in my own head. But 9th grade AP Physics, Martin Kirby, that was kind of the start of the whole thing. And we started off with just recording some velo. We got a radar gun. We would throw my weighted balls and record the velocities of them and then track, am I getting better, am I getting worse? That was kind of our start. Not so big data, but at least we had some data. I flash forward maybe, what's it been? I started throwing weighted balls when I was 8, so 20 years. I feel old. But now we have stuff like TrackMan. It monitors every big league game, a lot of minor league games. We have markerless, motion capture, biomechanics, semi, Kinetrax, stuff like that. Data is, I'm sure if you guys have watched any of the World Series games, there's all sorts of data, the spin rate, exit velocities, launch angles, all this different stuff. It pretty much permeates baseball now. And there's some things that we'll go over in the end on the future of where we see it going, and some things we're excited about developing right now that aren't out there yet but are coming. So let's talk about kind of how it's done today. But first, my kind of personal code of conduct when I think about what's going on around me and my career. You can't improve something unless you measure it. So collect a bunch of data and figure it out that way. Nothing is perfect. Everything can be optimized. Pretty much self-explanatory on that. There's always some sort of inefficiency. You can always get better at a process or a slightly better result. If you've always done it, that's why you're wrong. That's pretty much baseball culture. There's a lot of people that, oh, this is the way it's done. Why do you do it? Well, no, that's just the way we've always done it. That's not a good answer. There's better ways to do it. Good enough is a rallying cry of mediocrity. It's one of my favorite quotes by a guy I used to train with, Casey Weathers. He used to say it all the time, and I think it really kind of drives the point home. And then question everything. You can always ask a question. Depending on the answer you get back, it'll kind of indicate whether that's an area you should attack and try to optimize, or if it's pretty well optimized already. So I'm going to kind of run through some of the ways you would prepare. There's a lot of different ways to use analytics. Physical preparation and getting ready for a start, and then we'll talk about game day and how you prepare going into the start. We'll talk about in-game stuff, how you adjust, post-game stuff, how you analyze the start, how you think about it, and then kind of go from there. So, unfortunately, a player's typical routine is not really a routine at all. They all kind of do the same things on the same days, kind of, but they don't really know why they do it, and they don't really stick to it all that much. Typical questions you'll hear in a clubhouse. I've outlined some of them here, especially after a good start. The pitchers, where are you going tonight? What are you doing? A couple days later, after they've gone out and had some drinks and stayed up really late and they aren't feeling too well, not recovering very well, you'll hear, do you have a side piece today? You throwing a side? You going to throw a bullpen? No, I don't know. My arm's kind of hanging a little bit. I don't know if I'm going to or not. Do you even lift, bro, is a big one. A lot of starting pitchers don't lift during season. Some lift too much. Let's get pizza. Great for nutrition. So these are all some of the things that get thrown around a clubhouse all the time. I try not to do things that way. I do things a little differently. I'm also the guy that showed up here wearing shorts and a t-shirt. So I'm not super prepared, but don't let me fool you on that, but I try to be. I'm going to run you through some of my morning collections that I do. Every morning I wake up, some different things that I track. I'll measure my heart rate variability for kind of readiness for the day. And I actually take daily bloods. So I have a finger prick, and this machine that you see me carrying here, it's quite unwieldy. It reminds people of maybe a cash register from the 80s, because I get that one a lot going through the airport. But I carry it with me everywhere I go. I didn't bring it here since I'm only going to be here for one day, but it basically tells me the levels of creatine kinase in my blood. And creatine kinase is an enzyme released when there's muscular breakdown. And the machine was actually developed for studying muscular dystrophy. But we can adapt it to baseball and see after a workout, a lift, a run, a game, whatever the case may be, what is the spike in creatine kinase, and how much did you break down your muscles, and then how quickly do you get back to normal levels? So I'm going to reference my spreadsheet later. I think it's right here actually, but that's one of the things I track on a daily basis. I actually have two blood draw machines that I use, heart rate monitor for heart rate variability. I'm a big fan of wearable tech, so I have a ring on here. It's called an Oura ring. There's a couple different models out now, Motive and some other ones, but it tracks a bunch of stuff. My sleep quality, it tracks heart rate variability, it tracks calories burned, it tracks activity level, stuff like that. All syncs to a phone app. So I wear that while I pitch to kind of measure. I wear it nonstop, really. The only time I take it off is during a lift because it gets all scratched up on the bars. But it gives me a pretty accurate count of calories that I burned that day, so I can monitor my nutrition, eat more or less on different days, so I don't lose a bunch of weight or gain a bunch of weight going through season. When I get to the field, I have a pre-activity rundown that I do. I have a set of force plates that I carry with me everywhere I go. So I'll do a daily jump, stand there on the force plates, hands on my hips, jump as high as I can. We can measure a bunch of different things, the force put into the ground, how long I was in the air, how high I jumped, how long it took me to stop my descent and then direct myself up into the jump. And we can get some pretty good ideas of how ready my body is to do activity that day. It gives a nice little plot. The software I use gives a nice little plot of a standard deviation, 2 standard deviations, 3 standard deviations away from my norms, and I can adjust my workouts and throwing based on that. I also have a dynamometer that I use that I measure internal, external rotation strength, grip strength that I measure. So I just take some daily metrics on that front to get a better idea of where my body's at when I'm at the field. And then I track my volumes. I wear a catapult system. It's a little, it's got a bunch of different little sensors in it, but you put it on the back of your neck, you wear a shirt, slip it in there. It'll measure the number of throws that you make, how fast you ran, your running volume, whatever the case is. So I take all that information and I log it here in my daily spreadsheet. This is just, I don't think this one actually gets all the way to the end of the spreadsheet, but there's a lot of data here that we can look at. I've been doing this for about 2 years, so I have quite a bit of data I can look back at and try to figure out what makes sense for me and what doesn't, and at least have some sort of case study, try to optimize my processes.
He works with an Australian, I guess, what is it? Sports sciences?
Sports science PhD out of University of Sydney. But he's the one that looks over all that and kind of guides me on how to make adjustments. If you see this, do this. If you see that, do the other, etc. Okay, let's talk a little bit about preparing for a start. You don't want to bring a knife to a gunfight. So historically, scouting reports are pretty terrible. The catcher and pitcher will get together and talk about something, what the pitcher wants to do, and the pitching coach may or may not be there. Sometimes he is, sometimes he isn't. And it's all kind of like, oh, I think this hitter this, and I've seen him do this, and what do you think? Yeah, I think this. And the pitcher's like, well, I want to throw that. And so after about 5 minutes and getting not a whole lot done, everyone's like, all right, great, let's go get him. And you roll into the game without a real good plan, and even if you have a good plan, no real way of going about executing it when you get guys on base and you have to focus on pitching and can't think about the scouting report. So heat maps are rarely much better. Those are kind of a new thing. Here's an example of them, and this is kind of why they're not the best. The top image here across the top row, that's slugging percentage of a certain right-handed hitter against all right-handed pitchers on fastballs. So you can see that bottom row, down middle he doesn't slug very well against, which is most likely a sample size issue. It would make sense that if he slugs well on down and in and down and away, you probably can hit down middle.
For you that aren't familiar, it's the little blue box there at the bottom of the right-hand side, right? Is that what you're talking about, 045?
Yep. And also you can see it's just a different representation on the top row of the data. But if you look at his slugging percentage on the bottom against all pitches, you see that the bottom row is pretty blank, especially if you look at the heat map on the left. There's a lot of blue down there, and it would give you the idea that, if I just keep the ball in the bottom third of the zone against this guy, I'm pretty safe. And if you look at the one on the top, that's probably not true if you're throwing a fastball. So there's some problems with traditional heat maps, and this is one of them. Also another one, if you look at average versus slugging percentage on the same pitch type, on some hitters, it'll give you two drastically different heat maps. And that leads you to the question of, what's most important? What am I looking at here? Do I want to keep this guy from getting a hit and give him a better chance of doing damage if he does get a hit? Do I want to limit the damage, but he's going to get on base more? And one of those two models optimal? If I have guys on base, it's probably a good idea to not give up a homer. If I'm up 5 in the 7th and no one on base with 2 outs, I probably want to get the guy out more so than worry about the damage I give up. So there's just all these questions that the heat maps can lead to, and they're a nice visual solution, but they don't really cover a whole lot when you really get down into it in the uses of them. Matchup-specific heat maps are pretty cool. They still have some problems. And what I mean by matchup-specific heat maps, I think I might have here we go. So this is, I don't know if you guys can read the labels on the far left, but you have the top row is first pitch of an at-bat and 1-1 counts. And the next row is pitcher behind. The third row down is small advantage for the pitcher. And then the fourth row is the pitcher's way ahead.
Just a second. For all of you that may not understand heat maps, we assume since you're an analytics club and baseball fans, you probably know what a heat map is. But if you're looking at it from the pitcher's standpoint, anywhere it's blue is safe. Throw the ball there, right? Anywhere it's hot, red, that's a bad place. That means hitters are going to tear you up. If you're looking at it from the reverse, obviously, and it's a hitter, he looks at it a little bit differently. But so it's the color, and the gradations go from blue. Darkest blue would be, what is this from the pitcher's perspective? Is this safe?
Yep.
So The darkest blue is the safest place to throw the ball. Lighter blue, less safe. Goes to white, that's not
neutral.
Kind of neutral. And then when it goes to red, you don't want to throw the ball there because good likelihood it goes on the other side of the fence.
Yep. So these are actually examples of some heat maps I had developed in Cleveland based on my specific repertoire, the way my pitches move, my velocities, versus a specific hitter and how he does against those pitch types. And so you can see kind of, and going across the top, the left column is fastballs, then sinkers, and curveballs, sliders, cutters, or changeups, and then cutters. So you can see by my different pitch types in the different counts against this specific hitter, where's a good place to throw the ball. Now this isn't taking into account all the counts, and it's not taking into account the game situation, runners on base, how many outs you have, what's the score. And it's not taking into account the pitches relative to each other. So the fastball column is, if you throw a fastball, this is where you should throw it. But it doesn't give you any information on should you throw a fastball versus should you throw a curveball. I don't have a pointer, but if you look at the third column, second image down.
Third column, second image down?
Yeah.
So that one right
There's
up.
a pretty big...
There.
There's a pretty big blue spot there. So it seemed like throwing a pitch there versus throwing any fastball would be beneficial, but that might not be the case because of the way the heat maps are constructed. So again, these are pitcher and batter specific matchups, but there's still some problems with them. So what you'd like to do is you'd like to bring a gun to a knife fight. That'd be pretty fun. Like to optimize for league-wide adjustments. One of the things that will happen to pitchers that have a really good first half, go on 2 or 3 months, the information about them will get out there, hitters will develop an approach, and they'll struggle in the second half because they aren't able to keep up with the adjustments that the hitters are making to them. And there's no real way to show what adjustments those are. You can guess. Again, you can talk to your pitching coach, and you can talk to your analysts and see, like, oh, what do you think? And it's all very subjective. But there are ways, and we'll cover it a little bit later, there's ways that we're choosing to look at data and try to back out some information that'll give us more insight into this. Hitter and pitcher matchup specific and situation specific heat maps. It'd be really nice to see, and this is something that we're developing right now. I have a team of 4 analysts that work for me, as I mentioned, and some of them are working on developing this. But taking a situation in a game against a specific hitter with a pitcher-specific repertoire in a specific count, and figuring out what is the best pitch to throw in that situation to limit damage, not give up hits, etc. And the game situation will really dictate kind of how that is determined. And so you get one answer, basically, or a group of good answers and a group of not so good answers. And then if we can capture the hitter's approach in real time, this is one thing we'll cover in the futuristic type section of the presentation. But if you can figure out what the hitter's approach is in that at bat, that would be pretty valuable, and you can use that information at least at bat to at bat in a game, if not in a specific at bat. So that's kind of how we'd like to see things done and what we're working on developing. This is an example, and there's a lot of stuff going on here. So for a second, if you can ignore the little circles kind of overlaying on the heat map, I'll get to that in a bit. But this is an example from a post-game, or a scouting report, that I would get going into, I just ran it on my last start of the year against the Mets. So this is Robinson Cano against curveballs. And it shows you, on the right-hand side, the scale is 0 to 5. That's the run value of that specific pitch. And the way we calculate run values is if you throw this pitch, there's a certain probability that it will turn into a ball, a strike, a single, a double, a homer, whatever. So we take those probabilities and we look at how would those probabilities impact the game situation. It's complicated math, but you can get a run value of each pitch, throwing a curveball to this location. So all these squares up here are different, and the scale is multiplied by 10. So 5 run value is really 0.5 run value, but just to make it easier to look at. So anyway, if in this count, I think it's a 1-1 count with a runner on second, 2 outs. If I throw a curveball in these black areas, that's not very good. There's a very high chance that Robinson Cano is going to hit that, and it's going to cost me a run. If I throw pitches in the white area, there's a better chance that he's not going to hit that, and it's going to work out in my favor. Now, what actually happened is I threw a curveball in the box that has 2 circles in it, and he hit it about 110 off the wall and cost me a run anyway. But in baseball, you can have the best plan and still get beat. So when you're actually in the game, so that's that. When you're actually in the game, there's not really a whole lot of ways you can adjust. Unfortunately, you have to kind of focus on competing. But there's some things that go on in between innings that are pretty helpful. And traditionally, that would look like the catcher and the pitcher come in after giving up 3 runs, and they're like, "Hey, pitching coach, what do you see?" And he's like, "Oh, I see this, I see that." And the catcher's like, "No, I see this." And the pitcher's like, "I don't really know what to do. I suck." And nothing gets done. Nothing constructive anyway. I've been there plenty of times. It's not fun. So at some point, along came video. And so you could go down to the clubhouse and look at the video and see, okay, where was that pitch? And how did the hitter react to it? Maybe I had a good inning, but I missed, maybe the hitter's leaning out over the plate or something, and it kind of gives you some information about their approach. But it's really subjective, because I can look at it and see one thing, a catcher can look at it and see another thing.
But hitters look at it all the time.
Yeah.
So hitters have an at-bat. The first thing they do is they run into the clubhouse and they watch the at-bat. And they see how the pitcher's working them. So the next time they're up, they can make an adjustment. And they also look at the guy before them, the guy after them, see if he got worked the same way. So hitters are like, they're hooked on, they're video junkies, let's put it that way.
Yeah. And it's a lot easier for a hitter to look at it and say, okay, the catcher was set up inside there and he threw a fastball. It was an 0-2 count. They clearly are trying to get me out inside. Now, when he goes up there for his next at-bat, he has a pretty good idea what the scouting report is against him, right? So hitters, that's one way that hitters can kind of use video against pitchers that pitchers aren't nearly as good at. So video's good, but it's still kind of subjective. Velocity's good. You have a pretty accurate reading of like, oh, I'm throwing hard today or I'm not throwing hard today. And you can kind of correlate it to some analytics of, man, this guy is good at hitting fastballs under 92, but above 93, he's the worst in the league at hitting fastballs. So if I'm throwing 92 that day, probably not good to throw heaters. If I'm throwing 94 that day, probably good to lean on the heater. What happens, though, is teams started realizing that pitchers were looking at the scoreboard gun, and so they'd manipulate it. They'd either turn it off or they'd dock your velocity by a couple miles an hour, and you'd be out there pouting like, man, I feel good, but I'm only throwing 88. What's going on? So then we got TrackMan, and TrackMan measures a lot of stuff. Pitch breaks, so he tells you how your pitches are actually moving that day. Is your slider breaking more or less than usual? Is your curveball good or is your curveball bad? What is the actual velocity of your fastball? Is my release point different? Maybe I am struggling throwing strikes, I'm throwing it up here, and I should be down there, or whatever the case is. So it has all these different metrics, and it tracks it in real time. You can see it on a pitch-by-pitch basis, and that's pretty cool, especially with spin rate. I mentioned earlier you can't improve something unless you can measure it, and once you can measure it, you can cheat, and that's the fun part. We have this Pelican Grip Tip. And it's basically, we're going to pass it along. Careful with it. It's quite sticky. So
just put your finger on it and see. Just put your finger on it. There you go. Pull it off. You don't have to get any on it. Just you can just pull it off.
Have fun with it.
Stick it there and pull your finger off. See what happens.
Yeah.
That's sticky stuff.
So
that stuff, it's sticky enough that when you wear it, you pitch with it very long. You know the ball is white, the leather, right? After a little while, you'll end up with these little white flakes stuck to your fingertips, right? Because it literally pulls the leather off of the ball and attaches it to your finger. The adhesion properties of the stuff it's pretty amazing. Anyways, pass it around. You can have some fun with it.
Yep. And pitchers use this all the time. I'm sure if you've watched the postseason, you see spots on pitchers' hats. You've seen pine tar on catcher shin guards. If you watch the bullpens closely enough, you'll see people spraying their arms with who knows what substance. Point being, pitchers use sticky stuff a lot, even though it's not legal by the rules. What does that do for us? Well, once we started being able to measure spin rates, we found out that if you use sticky stuff, you can really jack your spin rates up. And that increases the movement on the pitch in almost every case. But even if it doesn't, here's some information. If you look at this, just take the top chart there. Swinging strike percentage, 98 to 100 mile an hour fastballs that spin over 2,500 get twice the percentage of swinging strikes that those same fastballs spinning 1,900 to 2,100 get.
So you're looking at that 15% there, and what'd you say, 1,900, 2,100? That one there at 96, 98. So 10% versus 15%.
15 versus 8.
Or 8, was it 8?
Yeah.
I guess 96 to 100 for 8. But anyway.
Yeah. So this chart basically just illustrates the faster you spin a ball, the more swings you're going to get, the more swing and miss you're going to get, the better off your stuff is going to be. There's been some pretty well-documented cases in the last couple of years of people whose spin rates have gone way up and who've had increased success on their fastballs. That's one of the ways you can kind of use some of these analytics to actually make immediate impact on a game if you can find ways to train it. We all want to win the war. We don't just want to go to war. So integrated, we mentioned this a little bit earlier. I'm going to kind of skip over this slide, but integrating the hitter approach calculation with the run values is something that we're working on. And algorithmic pitch calling, once you have a run value report that accurately takes into account all the different game situations and stuff going on, you should be able to get real-time data, check for any aberrations, and then make adjustments off of that in the course of a game. And an algorithm can hopefully do all of that, so you get away from the catcher saying, I see this, and the pitcher says, no, I want to throw that. And then you throw the ball right down the middle, and it gets hit 800 feet. So I'm going to let my dad talk about this one. He handles a lot of the ideas. He comes up with a lot of the ideas for our research projects and handles kind of the outlines of them. And this is one that he started. And this is kind of how we started trying to back out a hitter's approach, and I'll use it as a proxy for a hitter's vision in a way. So go ahead and jump in.
I don't want to get too far off into the weeds, but this is a fastball, a four-seam fastball on the bottom. That's the strike zone, the purple. And then the lighter blue strike zone up on top is a cutter. And what happens is, just because of the way pitches come in, and you've seen it in the World Series if you've watched any of them, where they'll show a fastball coming in and a curveball coming over the top of it or something. All pitches have a different flight path, right? So hitters are trained to look for certain things. So they see curveballs because they're used to seeing fastballs come like this, and curveballs have a hump that comes up above it. And when they see that hump, they know immediately curveball, right? So cutters tend to have, since it's a cut fastball, it tends to not have as much of a hump, but it has a little hump to it. And so if you look at cutters, the where the hitter would see the ball coming in, the cutter strike zone will be actually up a little higher. It's not an actual strike zone, but if you look at the flight of the ball would be up here and it would end up in the strike zone. So you could actually say that cutter out there that he's looking at is actually going to be a strike, right?
And just a quick aside, this is from the pitcher's viewpoint, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, so you're looking at it from the mound going to the plate.
Same deal in reverse, it just flipped the thing around. And on the bottom would be the strike zone of the flight path of a fastball. What's plotted here is actually cutters, and what's interesting about it is if you look at the top of the strike zone, you'll see some of these like red triangles, and that's all that's there at the top of the cutter strike zone. And that's because hitters will see the ball up there and they'll say, wait a minute, that's not a strike, right? Because if that's a fastball, that thing's out of the strike zone, right? So they won't swing at them, and what you'll see is you'll see a lot of called cutter strikes at the top of the zone, right? So because hitters hunt fastballs, that's what they do. They're trained to see fastball, hit fastball, adjust to everything else. So when a hitter's looking out there, he's looking for a fastball. If he gets something else, he always references it to a fastball. So everything is based off of a fastball. So this is a way of looking at analytics, actually large data sets, and trying to get an idea what a hitter responds to by mapping out what got swung at, what got called as a strike, what got fouled off, this, that, and the other, and looking at the flight paths of the two pitches and determining where the hitter actually saw them, where they were relative, the cutters were relative to a fastball strike zone. I'm an old school engineer, so plot by hand.
So we can actually take this, and this is some software that we're having developed. One of my analysts is working on it. All these charts of things that are being developed by my analysts right now, by the way, are incomplete. They're projects that are in the works. So there's some inconsistencies and stuff that we're still working through, but I wanted to show you kind of how we're going about thinking about these things. So what you have here is the contour lines you see on the visual represent the probability that the hitter is going to swing at that pitch. And they're, to describe those, it's in an 0-2 count. If you look at the column strike zone, it's an 0-2 count against a right-handed hitter on a fastball. But you're looking at this view 30 feet from the plate. So this is, the ball is somewhat, it's in flight. It's kind of halfway between the mound and the plate. And this is what the hitter's seeing. The swing zone, the red overlay, is in the same 0-2 count at the same distance from the plate against a right-handed hitter, and it's also in fastballs. So what you see is there's a good probability of him swinging at pitches in that area. He swings a little bit at pitches above that area, generally in 0-2 counts. As my dad said, any off-speed pitch will have a hump, and so hitters tend to swing at high fastballs more as the count goes along because they have to protect against something that will hump and then dive down into the strike zone. What we see here is we change the right-hand column to sliders, and you can see the probability of this hitter swinging at a slider is very high, kind of up and to the left, which would be to the arm side for a right-handed pitcher. So this kind of illustrates that the sliders that are popping up, he's recognizing them, they end up coming back into the strike zone, and those are the ones he's swinging at. But what's interesting is if you look at the right hand, kind of the right part of the overlay, there's still pretty good red above the contour lines on the very right of that plot. So if you know anything about how my specific slider moves, I have a pretty lateral breaking slider. It breaks about 17 inches laterally on average, according to TrackMan. So any slider starting on the right-hand side of that plot is going to end up way, way, way off the plate in the left-handed batter's box in a lot of cases. And you can see there's actually pretty high probabilities that those pitches get swung at based on this plot. So this is software we're developing to back out what a hitter is seeing. Is he keying on fastballs, or is he actually identifying off-speed pitches? And maybe his approach changes in an 0-2 count versus an 0-0 count, et cetera.
A couple things about this is the 30 feet is really kind of the decision point. For a 90-mile-an-hour fastball at 30 feet away from the plate, the hitter swings or he doesn't. That's all there is to it. Because the natural reaction time, that's where they got to choose to swing. You throw the ball from about 55 feet by the time you know your extension and stuff. So they have very little time to actually decide whether it's a ball or a strike. This type of heat map is being developed by us so that it gives you an idea as to what the hitter's actually seeing, not just what the result of the pitch was. The old type heat maps are based upon the result of the pitch, right? What would be more effective is knowing what the hitter's actually seeing and what he's responding to, right? So that's kind of the idea here. Once again, it's data analytics, though. There's all the data in the databases and stuff, so you take the actual data of what happened with the pitch and you manipulate it and back it out and do some physics to it to get the flight path and everything of that pitch, and then you map them on. Once again, it's a heat map. Where it's the hardest red, obviously, is and then it goes off to lighter red as the probability of getting a strike or not, or him hitting it or whatever changes. But the difference here is the topo map. It's pretty hard to put two heat maps over the top of each other because the colors, you get red and blue up there and you get purple and you don't know what's going on, right? So it's a topo map on top of a heat map so that you can get a visual perspective of where all things are.
Yep. It's a pretty cool thing. Hope to be able to learn what a hitter's doing in different counts and how he chooses to approach me and any pitcher. And then you should be able to run this in real time, compare the information you have coming into the game with what actually happened his first at bat, and see if he has made any changes and make adjustments a lot quicker.
A UPenn guy's doing that one. Is he an undergraduate or a graduate student?
No, actually this one's being done by Dylan, who's the only non-college graduate.
No, college guy.
The heat maps I showed you before is actually they're being worked on by a guy that's still at UPenn right now. And two other analysts, I'll mention a little bit about contract valuation, but the other two analysts are currently going to MIT, and they're working on developing an algorithm that predicts what teams are going to offer players in free agency and why. So after the game, you have your debrief period, and traditionally speaking, if the team won, you pitch great. It's not really a great way to measure individual performance or make decisions. So we started with pitcher-specific evaluations, ERA, walks, Ks, etc., and those are fine. They kind of just describe what actually happened. They don't really tell you anything about why. So then what's wrong with advanced stats like WAR, FIP, XFIP? They still are describing what actually happened or what maybe should have happened. XFIP gets into that a little bit. They're not perfect, though. Better than the first option up there, obviously. But there's better ways to do this. And we're back to this heat map. Run values, you can get a postgame report. The large black circle that you see down there in the bottom of the strike zone is the pitch that I actually threw. In this case, it was a 1-1 curveball. The different colored circles are the best places to throw that specific pitch type. So sinkers are pink, and so you can see there's some different locations that I could have thrown sinkers that may have been a better option than the pitch that I threw. Again, working on cleaning this up a little bit, and we have to run some smoothing algorithms over the heat maps to get a little bit more intuitive idea of locations. We run into sample size issues sometimes, so there's some bugs that we're still working out on. But this will give you a pitch-by-pitch report on, did you choose to throw the right pitch? And then with the pitch that you did throw, did you locate it right? And if you did locate it right, or regardless of if you located it right or not, this is the location that it ended up in, and this is what should have happened against it. And you should be able to get an overall game score at the end based on your decision-making process and the actual locations that you located pitches, and take results completely out of it. It's important to have that feedback loop, not only for pitchers to rationalize, man, I had a bad outing, but I feel like I pitched pretty well, but also to high grade your data model. If you're consistently getting a game score that says you should have given up 5 runs on games that you give up 1 run, and that happens over a long enough time span, probably an indication that your data is off or you're not looking at it right. But if over a season you predict that you should have given up, you should have had an ERA of, let's say, 4, and your ERA is somewhere around 4, then you probably have a pretty good prediction model. So feedback loops and iteration is super important. And we touched on that a little bit earlier. This is the part about contract negotiations. Owners used to sign players they liked, or the player's agent would go in and sit down, and he knew the owner really well, and he could convince them that my player's worth $800 million or my player's worth $4 million or whatever the number was, and there really was no way of deciding. And then a bunch of nerds started taking over front offices, and so they decided to make decisions based on data. And data-baked decisions. I can't spell. And now all teams have this data, and they make decisions very similarly. They look at a very complex algorithm, including the big one that's being talked about right now is aging curves. But the overall theme of it is players used to be paid based on what they had done, and now they're being paid on what they're projected to do over the next couple years. And pretty much all teams have models like this. So finding out what those variables are that they're using to predict is important for player development, just also understanding the landscape that we're in right now. But it creates a problem in the marketplace because players don't have access to the data. And by players, I mean players, agents, union, people on the player side. MLB teams have a proprietary access to TrackMan data, and the players don't get that. And so teams are able to look at a whole lot of different stuff. There's certain analytics teams in excess of 15 people working for MLB teams, and players are pretty much limited to looking at fan graphs or publicly available databases. So the ability to negotiate is difficult right now, and that's something hopefully that will be changed in the future to kind of level the playing field. But it's a really good example of how looking at data and being really good with data can create massive advantages for you in the marketplace. Okay, the better stuff, how it could be done soon. This is some of the futuristic stuff that we're talking about. This is kind of fun. I'll touch on the first couple, and then I'll let my dad touch on the last couple. The Apple Watch. I don't know how much you guys are familiar with what went on with the Red Sox, but they had people in the dugout that supposedly were wearing Apple Watches, and then people in the clubhouse were watching the game, and they could see the signs the catcher was putting down or whatever, and they would break that code, and then they would text into the Apple Watches of the people in the dugout, fastball's coming or whatever, and then they would signal to the hitter what was going on. So MLB banned Apple Watches, no smart watches in the dugouts. Till the spring training, when they're trying to solve the problem of teams picking signs, and they decided that maybe a good way to do it would be to have some sort of communication device between the pitcher and the catcher. So the pitcher could type in fastball, and the catcher would look at his watch and say, okay, and there would be no signs. So it's kind of cyclical. Maybe the Apple Watch will make a return. Passing around a canister of Pelican bat wax. No one enforces that rule, but it's illegal for pitchers to have any sort of foreign substance on them, on the mound, on their glove, on their body, anything. But no one enforces that rule because if I'm a manager and I go say, hey, check that pitcher, he's cheating, there's probably a pretty good chance that half my team or more is doing the same thing, and we're just going to get in a big retaliation war. So hopefully in the future that won't have to happen because of something that Warren's looking at.
You want to flip it or not?
Is it?
Do we have anything there or not? Oh.
Yeah.
All right. So what's interesting about this, and this is once again analytics in a different form. So you know, you have these spin rates that are in these public databases. And so for all intents and purposes, those spin rates in those public databases is just like a camera on a pitcher every single pitch. It's monitoring what he's doing, right? So if there was a way to take the actual spin rate and somehow normalize it so that then you could then look at the spin rate and see.
Hold on 1 second. It's important to note that different pitch types spin at different rates naturally. Fastballs might spin 2200, curveballs might spin 2600. So if you just look at the overall spin rate, you get widely varying numbers. But if you can normalize all of them, like you were saying, so that you can look at them all relative to each other, and you can see some pretty interesting results.
Basically what you try to do is you try to take a curveball and figure out a way to equate what a typical curveball spin is to a fastball spin. So you can just convert everything to fastballs, basically, right? And then you can actually see if the spin rate is pretty constant. Spin rates bounce about 50 RPMs. Just naturally, the bounce around the median is about 50 RPMs. But if you start seeing them bounce 300 RPMs above the median, usually there's something wrong. And from doing some tests outside of season and also some in-season tests.
There's a reason I have the Pelican case that I'm passing around.
What you find is a little sticky stuff can change RPM rates like 300 RPM. So if you have a 2200 RPM fastball, you'll see rates 2500. You can see them as high as 27, 2900. So you get up to 2900 spin rate fastball, that's a 30% jump maybe. And so what happens actually is the ball just stays up longer because it's spinning faster, so there's more aerodynamic lift, right? So hitters tend to swing underneath it, right? So, but if you can normalize them all, you'll see fastballs go along. You change all these things into fastballs, and you'll see them go along 22, 22, 23. Oh, 27, 26, 25, 22, 22. Oh, 27, 26, 25. It's kind of obvious something's happening, right? So that's what that's about. That database that they've so nicely created for everybody sits there, and it has all this historic data. If somebody figures out how to use that data to actually go in and look for stuff like that, data mining, I guess you'd say.
Yep, and I guess in the future, the idea would be to have a real-time algorithm running on that, and as soon as you saw someone jump out of the standard deviation range that you set, the umpire would be signaled and would go check the pitcher. And that way the managers would not have to call out the other team. It would just be done by the all-seeing eye TrackMan that actually won't be there next year. They're replacing it, but the same information will be available. And we'll get to that. This is some really cool stuff that we're excited about that we wanted to cover before we open it up for questions. Hitter gaze tracking. We're looking at ways to kind of back that out with the models that we showed you earlier, the heat maps and the contour lines, but there's actually some studies going on right now that utilize glasses, eye tracking software. So this video, what you're going to see is basically the green dot is the where the hitter's eyes are focused. And then you get a little image here of the eyes. Some people we found actually, when they take a pitch, the ball will still be in flight and they'll blink every time they take a pitch. And they'll blink halfway, when the ball's halfway to the plate, and that kind of indicates to us that they make their decision on whether they're going to swing or not really early. That's kind of confirmation of what we thought. What you see in this video, I didn't put multiple videos on here to show you differences, but this video, what you're going to see is this hitter actually tracks the ball almost all the way to the plate, within about 3 feet of the plate. So he's moving his eyes and he's moving his head to track that ball. He's a pretty elite hitter. It's something that you don't see in many hitters at all, but let's see if it'll play. So that's how fast it happens. I'll try to slow it down a little bit here. So here comes the ball. Oh, it happened a little bit too fast. Let's see if I can catch the frame.
Well, you can see it going out.
Yeah, if you watch it carefully, you'll see the green dot kind of jump to the plate really quickly and then go off the bat. And so it's actually, I think it shoots in in 200 hertz, 200 frames per second. I could be wrong on that number, but this is a way of seeing what hitters actually see. You can create a database of it, and then figure out, from there, how do you train hitters to see the ball better, and do you need to, and what are they actually seeing, and then for pitchers, how do you deceive them and trick them? So that's one thing that we're kind of excited about, and we're working on it in a couple different ways. This is being done up at Driveline Baseball, where I train. The reverse engineering it is being done by my analysts, like we've covered. This is pitch design, and this is really my dad's project, so I'm going to let him cover this. But using computer vision to actually design pitches to move the way that you want them to, and tell you why and whatnot.
So okay, now play it back. So what you see here is just to let you, so you got an idea. So this is the original pitch coming out of the hand here. This little circle right here is actually trying to track the ball. That little white dot you see up there, after they mask the ball and they try to figure out where the ball is so this thing can track it, that's what the computer's actually seeing. Right now you can see, stop it right there. You can see this red seam that's right along the top of the ball. See the black line up there, and you can see a slight amount of white above it, and then the white that you see here in the center section between the seams. But then there's nothing below it because it's all shadows. So as the computer tries to actually pick up the ball through masking procedures and stuff like that, it tracks it. And if you watch this little red thing, you'll see it jumps off of the pitch. See how it's moving and wobbling from side to side? And what you want is that tracking thing to track the pitch exactly. So there's an example of an advancement that would help in baseball tremendously is, computer vision in order to then track the ball better. Because from that computer vision, obviously, since this is high-speed video, this is tracking too after the ball's out of the hand. On this side, you see the actual pitch here and the ball and what it looked like. And this is what the computer picked up, the dots on it and stuff like that. But
as you can see on the, I don't know if you can see it or not, but over here on the
all right.
On the right, my dad's hand and his phone taking a screenshot of the computer screen, and we got to teach him the Command-Shift-4 command. But anyway.
So anyway, the deal is. We enjoy having fun with each other. The deal is, we go back one more though. The deal is there's amazing amount of data you can get off this high-speed film, all right? But you got to first of all be able to track the ball. I do it manually, right? Because I'm an old engineer. So I sit down and I actually plot where each one of these dots is going and trace it and stuff like that. But it takes about 4 or 5 hours to do one pitch, right? That's too long, right? So we're looking for a way to get it done in 4 or 5 minutes, right? Efficiency-wise, so you can run more pitches. That's what computer vision is about. Hopefully it'll replace my eyes because they're getting bad. But anyway, there's a lot. Computer vision is like the next frontier, right? Because a picture tells 1,000 words, right? So for pitchers looking at actual video, they learn a ton more about what's happening with their pitches by watching the video than any data set you can give to them, because there's this visual image of the pitch actually flying and coming off his fingers. And to see the ball actually come off the fingers and start to actually calculate where the fingers were at the point of release and why the ball spun the way it was and stuff, because all information that's out there now is that the ball is spinning. It can tell you that it is spinning, but there's nothing out there that can tell you why it's spinning that way, right? They do it all after the fact. So that's computer vision. It's a huge area. The guys we got working on it, one of them's a Cal graduate, Cal Berkeley. His buddies are out of Stanford, and they have hooks into Silicon Valley because all the computer companies are doing tons of computer vision now, obviously, with self-driving cars and stuff like that. The cars have to be able to see and sense what's out there, right? So it's a big area right at the moment. But it goes into analytics, because once you can see these balls, you're going to generate all this data, and once again, then you got to analyze all this data once again, right? So that's out there on the frontier.
So what we can generate from this is the spin rate of the ball, how fast it's spinning, the axis that it's spinning around in 3 dimensions.
Which isn't easy to come by, actually, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
The actual axis the ball spins around.
We can calculate the seam orientation, which is important as you start getting into fluid dynamics of the ball traveling to the plate. Magnus force generally dominates the reasons for the ball moving, but there's been some really good studies in the last couple of years that have shown that laminar and turbulent flow actually affects the ball in pretty substantial ways.
So you have laminar flow on one side of the ball, turbulent flow on the other side. The ball, it creates a pressure differential, and the ball just takes off.
Yep. So we can spin rate, 3-dimensional spin axis, seam orientation. If we hook up a radar gun to the video, we'll have the velocity. And from those, you have all the direct measurables that you would need to predict exactly what the movement will be. And so you should be able to, off of a video, one singular video behind the pitcher's hand, get the actual visual information so the pitcher can see what is actually happening, and then all the numerical information. On this video here, it took the output that you can see in kind of the right-hand part of it. It cropped it to the upper left, created a virtual ball spinning with the correct seam orientation around the green dot, which is an axis. It gives you that axis in 3-dimensional vector notation and the RPM of the ball. So this is what we're shooting for with the model that we're developing, is to be able to do this on a consistent basis. And then this is the last one. I mentioned the TrackMan isn't going to be in stadiums next year. Hawkeye will be able to. Hawkeye is what they use if you ever watched Wimbledon or any sort of tennis match. When they go to review and they show the virtual ball, missing the line by a millimeter or whatever, that's Hawkeye. It's supposed to provide much more detailed and accurate information than TrackMan is able to, and it'll be in all MLB stadiums next year. One of the things that they say that they'll be able to do in the future is generate markerless biomechanics information. And this is something that I've been doing since 2012, I believe, is getting markerless biomechanics captures done. This is actually a skeleton of me from 2012, before I changed my delivery. But it takes a while to do it. You have to set up cameras with a control cube, and someone has to go through and click on each joint 240 times a second. Or actually, they shoot at 500 frames a second, so they got to go through and make all those clicks and whatnot. It takes a long time to get a report like this. It'll take 3 weeks to a month sometimes. But what Hawkeye thinks that they'll be able to do is, using computer vision and advanced algorithms, they'll be able to generate a report like this on a pitch-to-pitch basis for every player on the field at the same time, which would give you a lot of really good, give you a ton of data that you can go mining and try to figure out what do the best pitchers do, what do the best hitters do. Man, this guy just got injured. He pulled a hamstring chasing down a ball in the gap. Let's look at the biomechanics of that. Who knows what the margin of error will be and when it will be here, but this is the direction that baseball's going. Computer vision over the next 30 to 40 years will play a huge role in that. That's kind of the new frontier.
And then obviously the analytics associated with it, right? Because the vision's fine, but somebody's got to analyze all the data that's just going to come streaming out of it.
Yep.